Okay, and we're live. Thanks to everybody for tuning in to this episode of No Capes. I have Chris Hartjes, aka Grumpy Programmer, on today. Say hi, Chris.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, taking some time from your Friday to listen to me talk about myself.
Okay, so we have a number of questions that have come in, but I kind of want to get started at the beginning. So how did you get your start as a developer?
I have been doing this for an extremely long time. So I first started programming professionally in 1998. So PHP, see, I can never remember because it's so long ago. I can't remember if I started on PHP 4 or the tail end of PHP 3. I remember there being objects, so that's probably PHP 4. So 1998. Started working at I initially started working as a job as just kind of the computer and IT person for a company, and this is how old school this was, that was selling CD compilations to professional DJs along with the licenses to go with them for public performance. Because people probably don't realize DJs are actually supposed to have licenses to broadcast the music in public. They just can't play whatever they want. They're supposed to actually pay a fee. So I just worked for them, and they needed a website, and they didn't want to pay for Microsoft licenses, so I started looking for something that was free. I had done a little bit of Perl when I was in college and disliked it and bluffed my way through the course. So Perl wasn't for me. And then I discovered, hey, there's this thing called PHP, and there's this free database, MySQL, that goes with it. And so I was like, this is perfect. So I built the website and built a little catalog where I figured out they had all their data stored in a Microsoft Access database. So I figured out how to export everything as comma separated, import it all into MySQL, and build a little front end so people could come to the website and type in the name of a song or an artist and find everything that matched. And so, of course, it was terrible, and as most things were back then. And my career rose like a comet from that point forward.
Okay, so you said something that's really interesting to me. Is it MySQL or MySQL?
Come on, people, it's MySQL.
Okay.
Not MySQL. That's Microsoft talking. It's MySQL.
Obviously, an interesting question. Okay, so you've been doing this for almost 30
17 years.
No, almost 20 years, sorry. Okay. So have you ever done anything other than PHP since college?
No. With the odd bit of, it's basically been PHP, and then other things too. I've done work in JavaScript, I've done work in Python, I've done stuff in Perl, tiny bit of Ruby, but it's been probably 90% PHP, which is probably pretty rare these days. And I think that's more a function of like when I got started in programming. Your options were really limited, so you had to you either picked something Microsoft, so either you're doing stuff in ASP, or you picked Perl, or you were lumped in with like the 0.5% of people doing stuff in something that wasn't ASP or Perl. That's how it kind of was when I got started.
Okay. So you, in my mind at least, are best known for testing.
Yes.
You talk about that a lot. And you have several books written about that. So at what point in your career did you start using testing? I'm assuming that first application probably wasn't very well tested?
No, of course it wasn't. So what did it for me was that, so I worked from beginning of 2002 until the end of 2005, so almost 4 years there, for one of these adult dating websites where you're looking for a hookup when you're out of town type thing. So the site's still up. I'm not going to give them any free advertising. So I worked on the first iteration of that, and it was a mess. And it was like, your typical spaghetti PHP app of the time, business logic mixed in with the display logic and all that other wonderful stuff. And so, we did this humongous long, I know maybe some people know this story. I never get tired of telling it personally. But I worked like 120 hours of overtime in 6 weeks leading up to Christmas. And so, came this close to wrecking my marriage and this close to wrecking my desire to ever be a programmer again. And so when that was all done and the site got launched, I said to myself, I never ever want to go through this nonsense again of debugging applications till the wee hours of the morning and stuff like that. So I started looking for things that I thought could help me. And our project manager at the time was learning about Agile. And so again, this is like 2003, 2004. That gives you an idea how long ago it was. I mean, that's like a billion years in internet time. And so he was learning about extreme programming and Agile. And I borrowed one of the books for the weekend to kind of get an idea what he was up to. And there was this thing called unit testing. And I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what I think could work to make it so that I never, ever, ever have to work these ridiculous hours to get something done. And so at the time, there was only simple tests for PHP. I don't think PHP Unit was even available in any kind of like public beta. If it was around, I had never heard of it. So that got me. I was like, what? You know, I want to find all these problems before our customers do, because to me that was like the worst thing possible. That someone who's using this app and paying for it finds a bug. It makes you look incompetent as a developer, makes the company look bad, and more importantly, caused me to work long hours. And I was commuting from like the western parts of Toronto by commuter train into downtown Toronto. And if I had to stay late, I missed the train, and I had to take the bus, which took like twice as long. So that was another thing, like, I don't want to do that. I want to hop on my train, and 90 minutes back home was bad enough. So I was like, I want to make sure this doesn't happen. So for me, testing was the gateway to going home on time. And so that's when I said, this is worth me investing time. And then I discovered, you know, there weren't too many people doing it. I had to ask lots of questions and learn tons and tons of things on my own. And the situation today is much, 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 much different. There are so many people doing it. I am no longer the only one submitting talks to conferences about testing, which is good and bad. Which it's good because it means I no longer am the only one that has to do it, but bad because it means conferences get sick of hearing me talk. So it means I have to come up with other things to talk about. But luckily, I'm super opinionated, and there's no shortage of things that I want to talk to people about.
Okay, so being that when you got started with testing, there weren't very many people in PHP doing that.
There weren't many people in any language doing that, which was even worse.
Oh, okay, so you didn't even have the ability to look at other languages to see how they were doing things. Okay, so how has your opinion on testing evolved over the last 10 years since you started?
Well, I mean, it started off with me wanting to find a way to not have to work late, and have confidence that the code I was pushing up, wherever it had to go, was correct and behaving properly. And then it evolved into, there are all these kind of other like programming practices you needed to learn in order to use these tools. So it kind of sharpened my skills as a developer. It made it impossible to write really sloppy code because you can't test it. You know, and along the way, it also taught me how to teach people these concepts as well. So I think it's kind of like a small little evolution there. It starts off with, I have to change what I'm doing. I have to change how I'm coding. I have to change how I'm teaching people things. And now these days, I mean, I used to be a lot more militant about the testing thing than I was before. And I've said this to many people, that I feel like it's no longer my job to be the jackass whisperer. It's like, man, you don't want to do these things? That's fine. Just be aware you're making choices. And if the choice is to not write tests and work late and wear that as a badge of honor, that somehow your suffering makes you better than the rest of us, that's cool, man. You wear that badge and you see how far that really gets you in life. For me, it's like, I want to talk to people that are interested in the same things. And I want to talk to people that are interested in repeatable processes and good quality code, and knowing what they do works correctly. That's basically the point that I'm at now. I want to help people get to the point where they can do their work and they can go home, because there's more to life than programming. I have a very active life outside of work, and I like having that active life, and every minute I have to work extra takes away from that. And testing is just one way for me to protect myself and say my time is valuable, and my time should not be spent enhancing shareholder value by working 120 hours of overtime. So that's kind of where I am right now. Testing is a way for me to have confidence and to go home on time.
Okay, do you think when you got started, because I think for me personally, when I got started testing, I spent a lot of time testing the wrong things. Did you, I mean, you said that writing testable code makes your code better, but I think in my experience, if you're not testing the right stuff, your code can still be just as bad. Did you have, I mean, when you first started testing, was it easy? Did you just know how to test, or did you spend some time kind of stumbling and testing the wrong thing?
I don't know that I necessarily spent time testing the wrong thing. I discovered very quickly what type of code was testable and what wasn't. I very quickly discovered dependency injection, and I quickly discovered how to use testable, so mocks, stubs, things like that. So I think those kind of ideas came to me a lot quicker than it seems when I talk to people now. So, I mean, I find it ironic, the fact that there's way more information out there on how to use these things, but people keep stumbling over the same stuff. So I don't know if there's, I don't know, maybe there's a different way people should be taught how to think about test doubles as it relates to testing. But for me, no, it's pretty much, here's the things I need to do, and you start writing testing code, and you're like, I mean, I looked at it in terms of, okay, I have to talk to a database. Does that mean I have to set up a database just to do my testing? I don't want to do that. I don't want to argue with the sysadmins at work. I don't want to have to maintain a box myself. Like, how do I get around these things? And that's when I discovered test doubles. So for me, it was always all about, how do I avoid having to involve other people in this thing that I'm trying to do? And just for me, the test double thing came really quick. I never looked at it in terms of testing the wrong things. I was like, I have all this code I have to test, and I just went through it and said, I looked at my code and said, okay, it's got an if statement in there. So I know I have to write a test that triggers the if statement and one that doesn't. I mean, that part kind of came easy for me. So, I mean, I can't speak for others, but I have never felt like I'm testing the wrong thing. I always felt that having some tests were better than no tests, but tests that took too long, you might as well not use. That's kind of how that's kind of what I discovered very, very early on. Tests that take forever aren't worth using because nobody's going to run them. And when nobody runs them, then you might as well not have any tests. That's kind of a thing I go through all the time with various projects. If your tests suck, you might as well not use them because they're not delivering the value that you need. Tests should be fast. They should be quick. Your whole test suite should take seconds, not minutes, to run. And if they take minutes, then I really feel that you're doing it wrong, and you might as well toss them away.
So that's, I mean, for any size code base, if you have a massive code base, you should still be able to write seconds worth of tests?
Of course you can. I mean, unit tests run really fast. You can run thousands of tests in like 30 to 40 seconds. It's not that hard. People go on and on about how difficult it is. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. It's like everything you need to know in order to write nice, quick tests is available to you. You can search for it. Books are not the only books that talk about these things. It's an effort thing. It's how much effort do you want to put into getting a nice, quick test suite. If you don't want to put the effort in, then don't complain. I can't be any blunter than that. It's about effort. It's about investing time up front to save time at the back end. People look at it and say, oh, there's all this stuff I have to do in order to write tests. Well, if you don't want to spend the time, then don't complain. Because I spend the time to get it done, and I'd like to think the stuff that I deliver is high quality. And if it's not, well, then other people can speak up and say, Chris doesn't know what he's talking about. But I would like to think that I deliver the stuff I commit to do on time, and I go home. Or more accurately, I walk out of my office at home on time every night. And it's very rare that I work late, simply because I learned how to do these things, and I learned to value things that let me produce results quickly. And anything that doesn't produce results quickly, I start questioning why I do it.
Okay. How much?
I see that you don't like that answer. I can tell by the body language.
No, actually, I do like that answer. No, I don't think it's bad. I think testing is definitely valuable, and you have to make a choice one way or the other. You're either going to spend time up front, or you're going to spend time later. Either way, you're going to spend time. So, and I definitely, as a parent, because I am, and you are, really appreciate the quitting time is quitting time, and now we're going to go be family. That's something that I struggle with a bit, and I think you and I have talked about that on the Twitters some. There's plenty of times when I'm working until 6:30 after supposed to be getting off at 5. So it's good to hear, your passion for testing tied into that and how it correlates. And I think it's nifty that that's a driver for that. But I had another question. So how important is it for code coverage? Do you rely on code coverage much?
I mean, I do like to use code coverage. I'm not. I mean, so I use code coverage generally to find out stuff that hasn't been tested. So it's not like I'm aiming for some number really, really high or whatever, like 95% or whatever it is. It's more like I like to use the code coverage to see what haven't I written tests for. Now, if we look at something like OpenCFP, the project where you still owe me a pull request, and the code coverage is terribly low, and I don't like that. But it's a side project. It's not my main. I don't make any money off of it, so I work on it when I get a chance. But I do look at the code coverage in terms of, what have I tested? What's been tested so far? Are there large blocks of code that I don't have any tests for? And I kind of use that to say, okay, maybe these things maybe they need some test loving, or maybe I have to look at this stuff and say, are we doing this right? Is there a better way we could be writing this code? I mean, I'm a big fan of Raphael Dohm's and idea of the code calisthenics stuff, where small methods, don't use else's, reduce your levels of nesting, no ifs inside for eaches and things like that. So I often use code coverage just to go back and look and say, oh, this code kind of looks ugly. It's doing too much. Can we break things down? Can I extract things into other methods? I mean, I think code coverage is important. I think working applications trump code coverage, but code coverage is also, to me, an expression of like how much confidence do you have in this app. If you have lots of tests and you have good code coverage, let's just pull a number out of the air. Let's say we're like 85%. I would be comfortable with a code base that has 85% code coverage and it's working and people are using it to say that I think that's good. But I don't think code coverage is just like all these other things for testing. It's a tool, nothing more. It's a arbitrary target that you set for yourself that I want to get. I mean, can you get 100% code coverage? Sure. Is it worth all that work? I don't know. For some people it is. For some people that want that 100% code coverage, it is. For others who value working applications that achieve the user's goals, then code coverage is kind of a secondary thing. I mean, for me, what matters is an app that meets the goals of the people that are trying to use it.
Okay.
I know a lot of people don't think I really think that way, but I do.
So I know a lot of people are very religious about testing, for lack of a better word. Like it must be done, and it must be done first. We have to do TDD, or you're not professional. Do you think you take that kind of black and white, extreme kind of point of view, or do you have gray area in there?
Well, I think that TDD is awfully hard to do if the app is already significantly in progress. You already have a bunch of code written, and so you'll be forever going back and trying to shoehorn tests into an existing application, and that's usually not a good return on your time. I mean, again, I talk about time all the time, and it's like, I can always make more money, I can always write more books, but I can't make more time. And so when you're working, you should be trying to apply what limited time you have to the things that are the highest impact. Now, what I really believe is that if you are starting an app from scratch, there's no excuse to not use TDD, because you're starting with a clean slate, and you can write tests to help you design the app. If you already know what you're doing, if you already have an idea of, I want this app or this module to behave in a certain way, you for sure should be able to go and write the tests and then write code until the test pass. But going back in with a large legacy code base and trying to shoehorn tests, that's a waste of time. I don't see any value in that. Professional developers should be writing tests, and sometimes they're unit tests, and sometimes they're integration tests, and sometimes they're end-to-end tests written using like Selenium and Firefox to simulate users logging in and doing something with the app. But if you have no tests at all for your app, no way to in an automated fashion to verify that your app works, then yeah, I'd say you shouldn't be calling yourself a professional developer. You're just a hobbyist and you're just fucking around at this point. If you're doing something, you should have some test to prove that this thing works. I remember when we had Brian Moon. You know who Brian Moon is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Brian Moon is a longtime PHP developer that I met along the way, and he works for Deal News, and he's down in Alabama. And so we had him on as a very early guest on DevHell. And so he was expecting me to rake him over the coals over his lack of tests for his app. But really, it was like, well, you have all these other things in place. You have lots of monitoring. You do code reviews. So in many ways, you have all these checks which are almost as good as tests. So I see no reason to beat you up over the fact that you didn't sit there and do TDD from the beginning. I mean, as long as like basically what you need are automated systems that can tell you when things aren't working. And sometimes those are unit tests, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're monitoring, where you have a base level of performance from the app. People are tracking things like the number of warnings and errors that appear in their error logs. If they go skyrocketing, then you have a problem. Some people like unit tests because they want to do continuous deployment. Every little change runs through some automated system, and if everything passes, code goes up. Etsy does this. Facebook does this. There are lots and lots of places that do that sort of continuous deployment thing. So people have all these weird conceptions about what small companies are supposed to do and what large companies are supposed to do. And I'm like, a company is just a company, but you need tests. So figure out what level of testing you're comfortable with, and you'll find out very quickly whether the level of testing you have works or not. If shit still keeps going up broken, well then guess what? You don't have enough tests. If things hum along nicely and developers are happy with what you're doing, then guess what? You have just enough tests. So, but I think if you're starting from scratch, there's no reason not to do TDD. All the tools are there, and anything else is just excuses because you don't want to be bothered doing it. I mean, you don't want to do it, that's fine, but just be aware of what you're giving up by not doing it. And when you're working late, trying to debug something in production, maybe they'll remember what Grumpy said to you about tests.
Okay, so with legacy applications, it sounds like you're saying don't test them.
I mean, I don't really see the point of like trying to go back and shoehorn tests in. Like if you want to write tests for everything, probably not worth it. But at some point, if you do want to write tests, you have to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, from this point onwards, when we get a bug, let's write a test to reproduce the bug. And then you can kind of let me backtrack because I think I've done a terrible job of explaining this. And I hate clarifying things because it just shows I messed up the first time. For legacy code bases, going back and trying to get 100% code coverage is a waste of time. So let's get that out of the way, okay? Making sure that you don't have the same bugs happening over and over again is a worthwhile endeavor. So I tell people many times, at some point, just put your foot down and say, okay, going forward, anytime we have new code, we need to have tests for it to prove that the code is working. Now, if that means you have to go back and do tons of work, well, guess what? You're going back and doing tons of work. Maybe it's easy. Maybe you can't do my Uber unit testing idea of everything's all nicely mocked and the tests run really, really fast. You can always go back and do that if you get commitment, right? Because testing is really about commitment and committing to say that I understand that tests are work, because testing is just writing code. And so you have to produce something, and writing code takes time. And I know I've bandied about that awesome study that Microsoft and IBM did where it was like the test-driven people were like spending 20 to 40% extra time writing their tests, but like 40 to 90% fewer bugs, making it up into production. So if you want to lie and twist the numbers to suit your goals, it's like, dude, 1 extra day a week, 90% fewer bugs. I mean, that's really not a hard sell. Only the most heartless of managers is going to say no. So at some point you have to decide, do I want to keep fixing the same bugs over and over again? And do I want to go home on time? And I think that learning how to modify your code so you can test it in an automated, repeatable fashion is worth it, because it's about opportunity cost too, right? Bugs you find in development are worth X. Bugs that you find in code review cost 2X to fix. Bugs that make it to staging server are probably 5X. Bugs that make it up into production could be 100X, 1,000X, 10,000X. I mean, there is a reason Amazon sat down and figured out how much money they lose every minute the site is down, right? Because that's actually costing them money. So, if you start making the argument in terms of how much it costs your company when stuff's not working, testing gets a much bigger focus. So to rehash and do a too long didn't read summary, going back to test just for the sake of testing is wrong and a waste of time. But tests from a certain point onwards, every bug, every new thing that we do needs to have a test, because we need 100% confidence what we're doing works. That is the sweet spot, and that is where you should be putting all your testing energy into.
Okay, and I like that approach. That's actually what I do with legacy code, is if there's a buggy part of the code that I keep having to touch, then it needs tests, obviously, so that I don't keep touching it. Okay, so we got a couple questions on Twitter. I'm going to take a break. Oh, wait.
I have Twitter and IRC closed, so I have no idea how badly I'm being trolled, so that's probably good.
I have them all up, so it's not too bad. So it's talking about code coverage and how that's not necessarily the golden standard. Is it something that you look at when you're considering like an open source package to use in a project?
So the first thing I actually do look at when I'm looking to incorporate a third-party project into my application is usually, do they have any tests, right? If they have some tests, it means at least somebody associated with the project thought tests were important. So that's kind of like one little star beside the thing. I don't necessarily look at a project and think that if it has less than a certain amount of code coverage, I shouldn't consider it. I mean, I do look for like kind of three things, right? Number one, is this going to solve my problem? Number two, is there enough documentation for me to have to figure this out without actually looking at the code? And then number three, are there tests? If it has all three, then I will enthusiastically adopt it for my project. I have definitely used libraries where I actually had to read the source code to figure out how to do something, and I think that's a waste of my time. I shouldn't have to look at a nicely bundled third-party library to figure out how to use it. There should be tests, and there should be good documentation, because oftentimes tests are actually a really good way to actually figure out how to use something, because you have to assume that when the tests are written, they're actually using the code in that test. I know I've figured out how to do things by looking at tests. So will it solve my problem? Is there good documentation? Are there tests? If all three of those things are met, then I will windmill slam that bad boy into my project. Code coverage is nice, but for me personally, low code coverage does not disqualify a library from my use. I have to be able to quickly figure out how to use it. If I can't, I don't want to use it. Because again, it's a time thing. How much time do I want to waste figuring out your stupid shit? I want to figure out my own stuff. I have my own things I want to do with my time.
Okay, so spend your time figuring out your own stupid shit.
Correct.
So you read tests as kind of to understand code. I kind of do it the opposite way, where I'm more likely to read source code than I am to read tests when I'm trying to figure out how to use something. So I think I'm going to try it the other way.
17 years of looking at other people's stupid shit makes me not want to look at source code very often.
Okay. Okay, so now we're going to do Twitter questions.
All right.
Who was the best and most handsome sysadmin you've worked with?
That's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a good-looking sysadmin. Next question.
Fair enough.
Although I think I know who asked that question, but let's keep going.
Okay, so where do you suggest to start to do testing in PHP for a beginner without any prior knowledge?
So are we talking like a beginning PHP programmer, or someone who knows PHP but doesn't know anything about testing?
Knows PHP but no testing. Okay.
Well, I mean, so since I'm constantly promoting myself, so my two books are probably a good introduction to get you into testing, because there's really two parts. You have to understand how to write code that you can inject dependencies into it, right? So dependency injection and inversion of control are kind of related to each other, but you quickly realize when you start to write tests that your code has dependencies, and if there's no easy way for you to set those dependencies, you'll never be able to write good tests. So learning to look at your code and figure out the dependencies, and then how to extract those dependencies so they can be passed into at runtime was the big light bulb moment for me. When I started looking at code and said, I'm creating a new, say you're using like PDO, right? And you're like, so I have to create a new PDO object. Oh, I'm creating it inside this method. Well, that's great. For this test, how do I pass in a PDO? How do I, even if you're not concerned about test doubles, it's like, how do I create a database handle using a database that I know that has known data inside it? That's when you quickly learn about test doubles. So learn what testable code looks like, and then then pick a testing tool and learn how to use it inside out. I mean, that's really the advice. So you look at something like my two books. One book kind of shows you how to write some testable code. Then the other book says, okay, if you want to use PHP unit, here's a whole bunch of common scenarios, and here's how you use that tool to accomplish the job. So learn what testable code looks like, then pick a testing tool. I don't care. It could be PHP Unit, it could be Codeception, it could be PHP Spec, it could be whatever. You could write your own, although I have no idea why you would, given how many options you have. Just learn those two things, and then all the testing stuff becomes easy. Then you learn to get fancy and refactor your tests, and learn to create helper functions, and learn how to organize test suites. All those things come later. The important thing is understanding how do I write code that is easy to test, and then how do I use the tools to test that code. You learn those two things, and you'll be like ahead of like 99% of the other people that use PHP.
Okay, so your two books are Guide to Building Testable Applications in PHP and
Correct.
The Grumpy Programmer's PHP Unit Cookbook.
Correct.
Is there a specific order that those should be read in, or should they be read in tandem?
I don't know, you should probably read the Building Testable Apps one first, and then get the PHP Unit Cookbook so you can learn how to use PHP. I'd say that's probably the proper order.
Okay.
But any resources that can kind of step you through what testable code looks like, so those are valuable. I mean, my book is just one of them. There are several other ones. Tutorials on solid principles for code are good as well, because when you learn how to do those things, it kind of forces you down the path of learning how to write testable code. In other words, like if you follow the solid principles, you end up with code that you can test. So learning solid PHP practices is probably good. Also, read anything Anthony Ferreira, IRC Maxell, has done. That will lead you to testable code as well.
Okay. Have you ever read, I think it's Code Clean or Clean Code?
I do have a copy of it in Kindle form. I have read through it. I should probably go back and read it again. That's a book that you can go over multiple times. I do have it. I have read it. I think it is I think basically any books that you, as a programmer, if you want programming to be a career, you have to learn to like writing code. Because if you don't like writing code, you're going to have a very short career as a programmer. And if you want to go into management and other stuff too, that's cool, because we do need technical managers. We do need people that know how to lead others, but also have technical knowledge, so that the programmers can't fake that they know what they're doing. And nothing's scarier to a lazy developer than a technical manager who used to code, because you can't fake anything anymore. You're actually going to have to produce something. So anything that teaches you how to actually become a better coder is worth investing time in. My favorite book of all time for teaching programmers things is The Pragmatic Programmer, because it's done in chapters. It's really code agnostic. It teaches concepts that will benefit any programmer. So books like Clean Code, Domain-Driven Development, what the heck is that book called? There's one, Coding Driven by Tests is a really good one. Kind of anything that will let you go and learn better programming habits is worth investing time in. Because if you're going to be a programmer as a career, you better like programming. And when you like programming, you'll learn to do as little of it as possible to get the job done. And you can't learn to write the minimum amount of code without learning all these good coding practices. Because really, I tend to approach code as kind of like as like I'm a sculptor. You have a big block of something that represents the problem. So you write all this code, and that represents this big block of code. And then you start chiseling away at it, taking things away, changing this, changing that, replacing 100 lines of code with 10, until you get something that's kind of like a sculptor. And I notice most of my apps, if you just like kind of, because you're tired and you defocus, you kind of step back and defocus the eyes. The code I write tends to take certain patterns. You start recognizing flow and indentation and certain patterns. I mean, this is kind of how design patterns happen. You notice you're doing certain things over and over again to accomplish tasks. And I kind of look at, yep, that kind of looks like the code I write now. And I'm replacing for each's with the various array filters, an array map, an array walk, and things like that. So I started with a big block of clay, and I basically sculpt it and chip away at it until it does what I want. As opposed to a lot of people do what I would kind of call the carpentry approach, where they start off with one block of wood, and they start sawing and cutting and bolting and screwing things and nailing things in place, and they're just building things in a different way. And they end up with a house where I start off with a big slab of something and chisel away at it until I get a sculpture. Not that I'm an artist, not that my code is always pretty, but it's like that's how I approach it. I write a whole ton of code, and then I chop away at it until I can't remove anything else. Until I'm still solving the problem and I can't remove anything else. Because less code means less problems, and less code means less tests. And fewer tests accomplishing more is good.
Okay. Question from Twitter. Do you analyze software metrics like NPath complexity if code coverage isn't important? So are you
Yes, I definitely look at cyclomatic complexity, the crap index, all those other wonderful things that you can get from the code coverage reports. In many ways, I find those things to be of higher value than code coverage because I can identify places where, like, without realizing it, I've created an object with an initialization method that has 400 lines of code in it because I just kept cutting and pasting things into it. So I find those sort of things, NPath and things like that, to be valuable in terms of it showing me where I've tried to get too cute and I've gotten lazy. And those are prime candidates for extraction and refactoring and all the other wonderful things that software craftsmen tell you that you should be doing.
Okay. Do you have a specific tool that you use for that?
Just Xdebug, really. Run PHP unit with the code coverage. Sit there or go get a coffee or go for lunch while it's generating the code coverage reports, and then come back and take a look and see what it's telling you. Those reports have value. Even, like I said, I'm not always concerned about the code coverage, but seeing really complex code and really high NPath just means like, yeah, maybe we need to take a look at what we've been doing here and see if there is an easier way. I mean, sometimes there isn't, but at least you can look at it and say, I understand this part of my code base is complex, and I need to figure out if it's needlessly complex or if it just has to be that way.
Okay. Let's see. So, more questions. What's been the hardest part of convincing developers that they even need to test?
The hardest part of convincing them? I don't know. Let me think about that for a second, because there's lots of things I could say, but I have to think of things that are impactful. I think the hardest part of convincing people to write tests is really changing people's attitudes, because really I've talked about this before. It's like writing code is, you have to write tests. It is extra code, and some people are always, if you take, I don't have time to write tests, and then already that means they're getting defensive about this idea that they're investing ego into a process that is not about ego, and that it's about results, and it's about correctness, and it's about providing return on the time that you're spending. And so, I mean, people say all the time, I'm a startup. We don't write tests at startups. It's like, okay, well, when your startup fails, is it going to be because shit didn't work? And if shit didn't work, is it because you couldn't be bothered figuring out a set of automated tests to verify that what you're trying to do actually works? I mean, there are so many other things in terms of testing other than just unit tests. I mean, I talked about them before. But, I mean, it's just this attitude that somehow what testing is okay for other people, but not okay for me. I mean, I don't know, I start to, this is all back to the I'm not the jackass whisperer idea that people have been telling me. It's like, you don't want to write tests, that's fine. Just don't complain when your shit doesn't work. Because everything is there for you to be able to write tests. And if you choose to not do them, then we're making a choice. My mother is a retired high school teacher who worked with special ed kids. And one of the things she used to say to them that they would just hate is that we're not losers, we're choosers. And everything you do is a choice. And sometimes the choices aren't good, but they're still choices. And as a developer, given all the resources available to you to be able to write some sort of automated test for your code, when you choose not to do it, well, you're choosing. You're saying my memory and my gut instincts trump repeatable processes. And so tests that a computer can run 1,000,000 times without complaining to you about having to write tests is way more valuable than someone that thinks their stuff works. Or, we live in an age where beta has become production, right? Where people just slam shit up and shrug their shoulders when it doesn't work, or get very cavalier, or as the case usually is, very defensive when stuff doesn't work. It's like, I'm attacking the fact that your stuff doesn't work, not you. Like, it's easy to fix these things. It's easy to write tests. These things are easy. They just take time, and people don't want to spend time. I used to be very militant. I just don't care anymore. Everything is here for you to write tests. If you don't want to do it, well, that's your problem. But just stop complaining about working late. Stop complaining about shit not working, and stop complaining about your projects going into the shitter because they never worked the way people wanted them to work. It's like, I just don't know any other way to tell people about this. It's like, everything is there for you to make this thing work. And if you don't want to do it, you're making a choice. And when you make those choices, stop complaining about your choices. Like, I have little kids, I tell them all the time, are you going to go do this? No? Well, then stop complaining about it.
Have you ever had a developer tell you that their code is good enough that they don't need tests? Like,
I hear that all the time. It's like, I can tell, my code's not complex enough. Code's not complex enough. Or the thing is, like, people who sign the check saying, I'm not paying you to write tests. It's like, well, I guess you're paying me to fail then, and I guess you're okay throwing money at me and get nothing for your investment. I mean, I know this is not a popular position to take, but it's like, if you're not going to write tests, then you are setting yourself up for a failure. If not in the near future, then down the road, the one critical time this thing needs to absolutely work, it won't. And then you'll be left wondering, and then when you start asking yourself, why didn't it work? Then then I will just say, because you decided that having proof that your application works wasn't worth your time.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, so we talked about how to convince developers, or how you've tried to convince developers. Now, how should a developer try to convince their management that test is needed?
Oh, this is easy. I even talked about this before, and I've gone over this in talks. So, what most managers and other people understand is how much something costs, right? So I've said this before, and we'll go over it again, right? The cheapest time for a developer to find a bug is when they're initially working on the feature or whatever task they've been assigned, okay? And now writing tests can just be part of that initial development process, right? So you could say that costs you X, whatever that developer's time costs you, whether you're paying them by the hour or salary, whatever it is, right? So once the code leaves the developer's hands and goes to the next stage of the workflow, whatever that happens to be, a bug that's found there now costs more. Right? So for example, if you do code reviews, which I highly recommend people do, if you're not going to write tests, for God's sakes, at least do code reviews. Get someone else to look at your code and say, do you think this is going to work the way it's supposed to work? Okay? So if you get that into code review with just one other person, when you find a bug that now costs probably twice what it would just cost for you, because now you have to go back and fix it. So that's great. So now let's say it passes the code review process and nobody finds the bug. Now, if you're lucky enough, you have a staging environment and a dedicated person looking, manually testing things. If they find a bug that has to be fixed, I'd say that's probably going to cost 5 times what it should cost, because now you have another person, right? Another person's time. Code has to go back to you. You have to spend your time, whatever your developer time is, fixing it. Then it has to go to code review, and that costs 2x or whatever. And then it has to go back to the person and then it has to be time spent pushing it up into the next environment, and that person has to test it. So already it's costing you more to find a bug that you could have found with a test. So, okay, so you didn't find the bug. Your code review person didn't find the bug. Your QA person that tested in staging didn't find the bug. So everything's good. Up into production it goes. Now you find a bug in production. Your users find this bug. Could be a minor bug, could be a major bug. Let's say as a conservative estimate, to fix this bug now costs 10 times what it would have cost the company for just the one developer's time, because now you have the developer involved, probably other stakeholders involved, other people try to interfere and get involved. I mean, I'm sure, Kayla, you've worked in a situation where the site is broken and not working, and like 20 people are trying to figure out what the problem is. That's 20 times developer time and cost. Whereas it's like, if one person had used tests to guide the development and wrote the test of the way this thing is supposed to be working, and wrote tests and all the tests pass, chances are that bug wouldn't be there. Now, can you find all bugs with unit testing? Of course not. Let's not be pedantic. You can't find everything. But chances are, if you follow this process of using tests to guide the design and architecture of your code, all you're left with are really weird edge cases. But then you have a process in place where you can verify, is this actually a bug? Does it occur in my development environment? Does it occur in the code reviewer's environment? Does it occur in the QA staging environment? So think of all the time that's wasted, of sites not working, 5 different people trying to figure out what's going on. If just one person had gotten clear requirements on what this thing was supposed to do and wrote a test to prove it, you probably could have saved a whole bunch of money. Money is something that lots of people understand. And you have lost opportunity costs. As a manager and as an owner, wouldn't you like your developers to be spending time building new things rather than always working 3-4 hours late every night fixing problems with the live site or with that application that you're distributing to other people? Right? You're wasting time. You're not furthering the business. You're going back and rehashing old things that could have been caught easily with the use of automated tests. Computers are great at doing what you tell them over and over again. People, not so much. So why not get the computer, which isn't going to complain about running your tests a billion times, go get it to do it, because the computer's going to do it without complaining. People, when they manually test things, they have their own agendas, they have their own blind spots, they have their own subconscious ways of avoiding making really difficult decisions about things. I am no different, which is why I rely on automated tests way more on me just randomly clicking around on a website to make sure it's working. So, does that answer your question about how to convince non-programmers about testing?
Yeah, I think it does. And there's been a bit of discussion that I've seen on Twitter about whether or not you really even have to bring that up.
Some people only understand money. They look at it in terms of, I'm paying my programmers to code, and I'm not paying them to write tests. And tests are just writing code. And I would just say to someone, do you like having people sitting here 60 to 80 hours a week getting totally burnt out when they could spend, although I never advocate overtime, but 40 to 50 instead, and producing higher quality stuff? Having someone sitting in a chair in front of a laptop does not mean they are being productive. It just means they're there. And I certainly have workplaces where I could figure out how to do nothing for 50 to 60 hours a week and not provide value to the business. It's about accomplishing tasks and creating things that people are going to use. This is all my whole anti-startup mentality, and we could talk about that another time, because I could fill up about 6 or 7 hours talking about things I don't like about startups. But in the end, you're trying to work on something and provide value to people, and tests are a really easy way to provide value, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the point I was making, though, is I think the analogy has been made with other craftsmen, and also maybe with surgeons. I think the analogy I heard was with surgeons. The surgeon doesn't tell you when he's doing your operation how long he spent scrubbing his hands. It has to be done, and it's done, and it's included in the cost. So the idea that I've heard in the discussion that's been had on Twitter is, do we even need to itemize that for the business people? Or should it just be coding, which I know includes tests, will take X number of hours, and I don't necessarily need to tell you how many of those hours are testing and how many aren't.
Oh, you mean you're talking about where people are asking, how do I tell clients and other people that I'm writing tests? That's kind of the question. Well, you don't tell them. You just say, this is what I do. This is how I build applications. This is what I do. Tests are part of it. I do it so you just tell them, I do this so that the end product is the way that you want it. Tests are just part of it. I mean, I don't think you should sit there and break it down and say, I spent this amount of time coding and this amount of time testing. It's like, I spent this amount of time developing this thing for you. And if it meets your business goals, great. And if it doesn't, you need to tell me what we need to do to make it meet those goals. That's all.
Okay, so that falls in line with what I was thinking there. I think we had one more question. And you may have already touched on this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Test first, test during, or test after?
Like in order of preference, or which one should they be doing?
Which one should they be doing, or I guess if you have an order of preference.
Well, testing after is an abomination, so you shouldn't be doing that. Test first and test during. Like, test first is good. Test first is achievable when you're starting. Like greenfield, no code written yet, best time to start doing test-driven development. Test during is what people do anyway with a legacy app that has tests already. Like, I mean, I still try to tell people all the time. I hear places I've worked, status updates, the stand-up, and people are like, I've written the code, and now I'm writing the tests. And these days I've just turned off my camera because I'm tired of rolling my eyes and bowing my head, and I'm tired, and I mute my mic so they don't hear me swearing and yelling at people. It's like, if you have just writing tests is just part of the process, and writing tests afterwards means that you're writing tests against code you already wrote. So you've already made up your mind what this thing is supposed to look like, and you've already decided that the design and the API is perfect, and you don't need to change anything, because now you're writing tests against something you've already decided. It really should be the other way around. Oh, hold on, phone call. I'm going to mute this. One sec. Ugh, okay, that can go to voicemail. Sorry. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So test during is fine. Test first is preferable. Testing after just means test-driven development is using the test to guide the architecture of the code that you're writing. That's all it is. You're deciding ahead of time the scenarios, and then you're just writing code until the scenarios pass. So as part of that process, you're designing something, and you're saying, I want my API to look like this, and it's going to interact in this way that I'm using the test, to guide how I do this. When you're testing afterwards, just like to me, test afterwards just feels like, well, I'm writing tests because I'm being told I need to write tests, not because I think the tests have any value. I mean, that's how I look at it. Testing after, to me, means that you've already decided the tests have no value, and you're just doing them because someone is telling you you need tests. You should always be deciding ahead of time before you write any code, you should have in your head already how you want this thing to work. And then the tests just let you do that. You write a scenario, you're writing a test as if everything is working in your head the way you want it to work. And then you just bang out code until the test passes. I guarantee you the code that you write using test-driven development will look better than the code you write using test after development. Guarantee it. 100% grumpy guarantee.
Okay. So do you follow like a red-green cycle where you write a test, write the code, and go back and forth, or do you write multiple tests at once and then implement code to make them pass?
I tend to write tests around functionality that I want to implement, so sometimes that is just one test. Sometimes it's multiple tests. I try to limit myself to one test case at a time. I'm not necessarily a believer in only like one assertion per test. I think that's like, I don't know, what's the correct phrase? Pedantic. I don't know any other word to describe it. I don't think you need to be strict about it, but what I tend to do is I tend to write a scenario using like BDD style language. Given you've seen behavioral driven development, the type of language? Mm-hmm. Familiar with? Okay, so I'll write tests like, given I have this object and I pass in this array, when I munge it with this parameter, I get back a response that looks like this. So that's kind of how I tend to approach it. I kind of write like a pseudocode type idea for the test, and then I just write code until the test passes. And I'll try to write as much as I can till I'm confident what I've written matches the pseudocode. Then I'll save it, then I'll run the test, and then I'll start looking at what's breaking. And then after that point, every change that I make, I rerun the test. And I have actually written tests where my first pass through the pseudocode, translating it into real code, worked, and the test passed. Sometimes it happens, but other times it's been a very iterative process. I've gone back and like my initial assumptions on how this thing works were actually incorrect and not actually solving the goal, or I discovered I was missing a dependency, or I discovered this way I was trying to do it was too complex. I mean, all these things happen, to use a nice cliche term. Testing is always a voyage of discovery, and discovering that your assumptions are incorrect. So, I try to write one test case at a time, write the pseudocode, write as much code as I think I need to match the scenario, run the test, and then start iterating. Every time I change something, save, rerun the test. That's kind of how I do it.
Okay, do you ever leave for a day with broken tests?
I try not to, but sometimes I gotta go, and sometimes I got stuff to do. I generally try to finish a test case. Again, this also goes back to time management skills. I would like to think that I have really well-refined time management skills, and I have instinctively learned cutoffs for the day on certain tasks. So I'll be like, sometimes I'll look at something, do I really want to start working on this at this stage in the day? Like if I have like an hour and a half to go on my day before I normally leave, and I look at a task and I think that this is going to be like a 3 to 4 hour task, there's no point in starting it because I'll get knocked out of the zone and I'll come back to tomorrow and I'll be like, what was I working on? Because, sometimes I get inspired in the middle of working on something and the thing ends up taking way less than I thought. But I want to always leave myself enough time to accomplish a task I've set out for myself. I don't want to start a 4-hour task when I only have an hour of my working time left to go. And will I work overtime to finish things? Yes. I know that'll make Evan, if he's listening, happy. Yes. I sometimes work longer to finish things. I don't automatically shut off when 5 o'clock rolls around. So do I leave things in a broken state? Sometimes. I try not to. I instead kind of plan my day in the morning and say, I know I have this task. It's going to take me this long. I'll allocate a block of time to it. And if I don't have enough time, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to do this one tomorrow. And I've told people, I don't want to start on this today because I'm not going to get it done today. I would rather start on it tomorrow and finish it completely tomorrow. And in the meantime, there's all these other smaller tasks I can go and do and get those done in the time that I have left to me. I'm very ruthless about my calendar and time management because I could not do all the things that I do without learning time management skills. It just wouldn't work.
So I actually purposely, on occasion, leave broken tests when I leave for the day.
Heretic!
Because it does that I forgot where I was at, I forgot what I was doing thing. Well, when I come back to red test, I'm like, oh, right, that was the next step. That was what I was supposed to be doing. So it's kind of almost like a bookmark for me, and it's probably bad practice, and I'm a heretic, but it works.
I don't know. Actually, I think there's some value to that. I mean, if you leave things broken, at least when you go back, as long as you remember to rerun those tests, then you'll see right away that it failed. I mean, the easiest thing in the world for a developer is to get distracted and forget to go back, which is why I learned to plan my day and write things down and have an idea when I start a day exactly what I'm going to be working on, because that way, the internet is full of things to distract us, and it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and just not get stuff done. And learning to use my calendar ruthlessly was the only way I could protect myself from actually getting stuff done, because my ambition far outstrips both my skill and the amount of time I have available. So making hard choices about what to do with my time, I had to learn that, and I apply that both to my day job and in my personal life as well. I live out of my calendar, and I've literally told people, if that thing's not on my calendar, I'm not even going to think about it. So I had to. Just too many things to do. Like I tell my kids, I can make more money, I can't make more time. So I have to be very choosy about what I spend my time doing. And I was happy to come on and talk to you for an hour plus. That was something I thought was a very high return on my time.
Well, thank you very much. I do really appreciate you coming on, and it's been a blast. We're about at the hour mark, actually. So
I
actually had a bunch of other things I wanted.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can talk for more time. I still have lots of time available. If
Okay,
we want
awesome.
to do an extended no case, I'm good.
Extended no case. Okay. So we've talked a lot about testing, and I love that because that's really an area you're passionate about. But you are also a public speaker and an open source maintainer and a conference organizer.
We never talk about any of that stuff. Let's get into that.
Okay, so how did you get your start speaking? How long have you been speaking?
So I believe the first conference talk I ever gave was, got to be around 2007, 2008. I spoke at a conference in the precursor to Confu. So whatever the last year before Confu became Confu, it was PHP Quebec. So I spoke there. I think that was the first public talk I ever gave. I'm pretty sure that did that. It's just I wanted to go to conferences because I wanted to. I found that where I was working at the time, the people that worked there weren't as passionate about learning stuff as I was. Lots of them were 9-to-5 developers. You know, the programming was the job that they did, and they had interests outside of work that were not programming related. And that's cool. There's absolutely, I want to make that clear. That is fine. Working a job to fund your life outside of work, you'll get no complaints from me. But I was really interested in trying to learn as much as I could. So to me, conferences were a way to do that. And so I went to a conference in 2004, I think was my first one. One in Toronto, PHP one of the ones done by the PHP Architect folks. They held it in Toronto, and I went to that, and that was kind of my first introduction to people talking about programming. And so I used to be one of those people that was terrified to speak in front of large groups. Like, you know, in high school and stuff, I would present, and I'd be up there with the paper in my hand, and I'd be shaking as I tried to talk. And then when I went to college, and we did the first time I went to college twice. So I have I guess the equivalent of community college in the U.S. So I went twice because I liked it so much. So I have a diploma in civil engineering. So I learned how to build bridges and pave roads, and to look at roads and say, man, they really fucked up the leveling there. And I did computers. I did computer science. So when I did the civil engineering stuff, we had a course, a mandatory course for doing presentations. And I dreaded doing that because, like, man, I hate getting up in front of people and speaking, which I'm sure shocks many, many people who are listening now. They could have seen me 18, 19 years ago. But whatever I learned in that course flipped the correct bits in my head, and I got over my fear of speaking in front of people. And I'm sure it didn't hurt having a parent who was a teacher, that those qualities that allow you to teach people were, you know, genetically inside me somewhere. And so that course helped bring them out. And then I liked going to the conference, and then I was like, you know, this looks like this is something I could do. Because I was already kind of doing that sort of thing at work, talking to people, saying, hey, I discovered this thing. Do you want to talk about how to use this particular library, how to use this tool? Can we talk about how to get more out of MySQL? All these things. And so I just discovered I liked it. I liked sharing with people. I liked teaching them things. And then so that's when I found out about the whole conference circuit. I was like, you mean I can submit a talk and they'll pay me to come, and they'll fly me somewhere, and they'll put me up in a hotel? This is awesome. I want to get involved in this. And that's just kind of how it started.
So at that first talk, at the what is now Confu, were you super nervous? Did you do the whole paper?
Was I nervous? Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I was super nervous. First talk in front of a group of people, but I had prepared well. I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. The talk, ironically enough, was about what PHP developers could learn from Rails. And this is the idea of teaching developers about convention over configuration, and about model view controller, and about all these concepts that at the time, so if you keep in mind this is 2006, 2007-ish, those were still really foreign concepts to most PHP developers. The idea of, you mean I just don't mash my business logic up with HTML and spit it out onto the screen? That's crazy. What are you talking about? This sounds like too much extra work. And then I started talking, and then after that, I started getting into talking about testing, and that's kind of where the whole career as a speaker, public speaker, and then dovetailing into being an author all came up with. It was just, sure, I was nervous, but I did it, and I realized this is not so hard. When you know the topic and you're and you know how to like socially talk to people. Social skills can be learned. I guess I'm lucky that I don't have any hang-ups about talking to people, talking to groups, sharing with people. I know many of my fellow developers have various mental health issues that make these things tough. These people are smart and knowledgeable, and one-on-one you can gain a lot of info from them, but you put two people in front of them and that's it. Their own whatever barriers and problems they have make that impossible for them to overcome for whatever reason. But for me, I guess I'm very fortunate that I can now speak in front of groups of people, and it could be 2 people, it could be 1,000 people. I could be keynoting a large conference, and it don't bug me at all anymore. And that's good because it means now I can concentrate on being entertaining and educational at the same time. It means I don't have to worry anymore. Just a different phase of my career in terms of speaking. Speaking is easy for me now, and now I can concentrate on being funny and providing value to people. Because I imagine people come to hear me talk because they want to learn something, and now I feel like I'm really in a good place to actually teach people things. It wasn't always that way, but I feel good about it now.
How many talks have you given in your speaking career?
So I think if I've been speaking since 2007, so that's what, we're coming up on 8 years. 8 years, at least 4 times a year I went to conferences, multiple talks at conferences. I don't know, if I were to ballpark a number of talks I've given both at user groups, that I've done in person at conferences, that I've done through things like Day Camp for Developers, Nomad PHP, I don't know, probably 100, at least 100, I would say.
And so after 100 talks, you no longer get nervous before you go on stage?
No, not anymore. I've done it so many times. I'm not afraid of interacting with the crowd. I've learned to prepare. I've learned to make sure I actually know what I'm talking about before I speak on that topic. And I just go up there and deliver it. And like, it's a skill you can learn, like anything else. I wasn't always this way, but I learned because I wanted to do these things. Like I said, my ambition really exceeds my skills and my time, and so I conquer things one thing at a time. And speaking is just a topic I feel I've nailed, and I can consistently give a good talk. So I don't get nervous anymore because I won't give a talk on a topic that I don't know anything about. And I always make sure I prepare, and I always make sure I know exactly what I'm doing. And those are the 2 big things. I've watched many speakers half-ass their way through a talk where they clearly don't know enough about the topic to speak about it, and that makes me sad because you can see them. I've watched people and seen them struggle to give a talk, and it's sad because it could have been so much better.
Have you ever gotten poor reviews on a talk?
Have I ever gotten poor reviews for my talks? Absolutely. I've seen people not like my talks. I've seen people give bad comments, but I don't give a shit. I gave a talk. More people like what I'm doing than don't like. So random internet commenters saying that they don't like what I do, I'm not speaking to them. I'm speaking to people that want to learn, who are interested in learning the things that I am passionate about. I don't. If people don't like what I'm doing, I really don't care. Like I joked before, I'm happy to wipe my tears away with $100 bills from selling books and videos to people. I don't care. You don't like what I'm doing? That's okay. There's lots of people that do like what I'm doing, and as long as people like what I'm doing, then I don't care about the haters. It's when people don't like what I'm doing anymore that I need to reevaluate what I'm doing.
When you're done wiping your tears, if you need to dispose of those $100 bills, I'll give you my address. I do some good recycling work.
Well, they're Canadian $100 bills. They're not worth as much as US $100 bills. So I don't know how much you want colored plastic being delivered to your house.
I actually have some Canadian money. It's kind of pretty and odd. Okay, so you've talked a bunch about your books, and I actually own one of them, and it's very good. How did you get into writing books? What made you want to write a book?
Well, see, to show people, you actually can't get. See, I actually have paper ones of my books. Look at that, eh? Look at that, nice, nice glossy cover. That's not a bad one. And then this is the other one, which is much bigger. But yeah, I made sure to get paper copies of my book. My wife calls my book my pamphlets because she thinks a book should be like 300 pages long. And I told her it takes too long to write a 300-page book.
So do you sell paper copies of your book? The only one I have is on
Just
Lean.
through Lulu. They're on print on demand. I don't know. It's hit or miss. I just do them. I make them available because some people want paper copies. But I generally discourage people from buying the paper ones because I make less money off them. I'd rather them buy the ebook, to be perfectly honest, because I make more money. So I was very rude and interrupted you. Keep going.
Yeah. So what made you want to write a book?
What made me want to write a book is I wanted to make money on the side. It's plain and simple. I was trying to find a way to make more money, and wanted to find a way that I can make to have money show up in my sleep. And that's basically what these books are like. I sit down and spend 100 to 120 hours writing a book, and then it's done. And then I spend a time every single week promoting the book and talking to people about it. And then people go to my website or they go to LeanPub and they buy my book, and I get emails that someone has bought my book. And many times I wake up and sometime in the night somebody bought a book. So this is called passive income, and I wanted that. I wanted to be making money when I wasn't working, and the books were a way to do that. And then that's basically it. I wanted to make money on the side by talking about things that I knew something about already, and I had decent writing skills. I had no problems cranking out a book and getting people to, and then handing it off to people for them to critique and edit. And despite what people think, yes, I do get people to edit my books and do spell checks and things like that, despite some of the comments I've seen from people. So a big to those people. And yeah, I wanted to make more money, and writing books was a way that I thought I could make passive income, and it's worked. I mean, the money from the books just frees me up to do other things. It lets me do things like have my wife's entire paycheck go to doubling down on our mortgage so we can be mortgage-free faster. It means I can do egotistical things like say, I've bought a car and I'm going to write a book to pay for it. So, I don't know what to tell people. People think writing books is hard. Writing books isn't hard. It's not hard. Having discipline is hard. And sitting down and saying, I'm going to get this thing done from start to finish is hard. Committing to doing things is hard. And most people are really fucking lazy and just don't want to do it. And I instead chose to be ambitious and apply my time to things that I thought could make me money. Because someday, things like my books and videos and all those things will make more money than working for somebody. And I look forward to the day when I am my own boss. I'm getting close, but that's what all these things are. My friend Amy Hoy, who runs this awesome product development course called 30 by 500, calls it stacking the bricks. And so these books and my videos are all bricks towards building Grumpy Learning Incorporated as my full-time thing. And eventually I will get there. It will take me a couple of years, but I will get there because I want it and I'm not lazy. And those two things together, I think, ensure my success.
Okay. I mean, you definitely have a goal. Now, before writing these books, I would assume that you had to build kind of a reputation as an authority in this area.
Yes.
And I think you very much done that because I think of Chris as the testing guy. So that's good. What made you choose the grumpy programmer? Why that persona?
It seemed like a unique niche to occupy. Nobody else is really kind of being like that, being aggressive online and talking about testing in the PHP community anyway. So it seemed like an easy thing to do. It's like, can I be grumpy about stuff? Absolutely. So I didn't have to learn how to be that way. I was already kind of that way about many things related to programming, just so pissed off at so many things and people's attitudes towards things and how shitty these tools were and how nobody seemed to give a damn about what they were doing. So being grumpy about stuff came pretty easy. So I thought, well, I want to start doing these books and giving lectures and doing things like that. It was like I felt like I needed a brand. And so the idea of being grumpy about stuff, it seemed like it was humorous, and there was some truth to it, and it just gave me focus and gave me a label to apply to all these things I was trying to do. And so in that respect, it's been a smash success. You know, I have people, I mean, it was weird at first when I would meet people, and instead of calling me Chris, they would call me Grumpy. And that was kind of weird at first, but it's just like I've come to embrace it, because really it's like, you know, it's a persona I've created, and like, why run away from it? I mean, I can get, I don't know, I could probably ride this gravy train of being grumpy for years and years and years without running out of things to talk about, and, you know, books to write about it, talks to give, all these things. It's never ending, and so it's been a good fit, and it's humorous, and, you know, it gives people, it makes me stand out from everybody else. And when you're trying to market yourself as an authority on something, if, you know, just being good at it isn't enough. You know, you have to provide, you know, it's like you have to kind of provide proof. You have to have an identity associated with it. And I know people that have been very successful at identifying themselves with various aspects of programming. And just like a humorous one with being grumpy seemed to me the best way to draw attention. So draw people in, and then once you have their attention, then you better prove that you know what you're talking about. And I would like to think I've proven time and time again that I know what I'm talking about, that I'm not a one-trick pony. I couldn't have lasted this long in this industry just yammering on and on about tests. Can't do it. I actually do know how to code, and I'm sure that surprises a lot of people too.
No way, really?
Yes, really.
Okay, so do you ever regret having built a grumpy persona?
Not for a second, not at all. I've made too much money. I've made too much money being grumpy. Why would I regret it?
I've seen you say a couple times on Twitter that your Twitter, you approach it kind of like a performance art.
It is. Twitter is great for like being funny and performance arty, and I think I've said it to enough people enough times that when I start acting like the grumpy programmer on Twitter, it's usually is an act, and if I'm really mad, people know, because I'll tell them privately. Like when I'm really mad at people, it's not public on Twitter. When I have a problem with people, I approach them and talk to them about it. And I just think the thing is, people need to understand that it's a label. Like, I think people have been hesitant to approach me because they think I'm actually grumpy, like I'm going to reject their ideas outright and yell at them and stuff. Like, I've had conference organizers say that. We didn't ask you, like, we were afraid to approach you to come and speak. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, ask anyone who's met me in person that I'm not actually the way I am on Twitter in person, because I would be unemployable if I was the way I am on Twitter. I couldn't hold a job because I would get fired all the time for being an asshole. So I would like to think I'm a nice person. I mean, okay, you've met me. I don't know. Maybe you thought I was a dick when you met me at True North, but maybe as the conference organizer, you can't say that to my face. I don't know. But I just kind of tell people there is a performance art aspect to Twitter, but it's about, I try to entertain and inform people at the same time. And some people are good at it, and some people are not. And I'm just lucky. I'm lucky that I feel like I've been very good at promoting my ideas via social media. Like my books, that's my primary means of promoting it. And I get lots of people saying to me that they don't understand how I could be so successful doing that on Twitter. I'm like, I don't know, man. I just did it, and it worked. I don't know if it's repeatable by other people. Maybe some people are not comfortable doing things the way that I do them. I don't know. But it's worked. But yes, I do sometimes get tired of people always poking at me about the grumpy stuff. It's like, once in a while I need to remind people, I am a person, I have feelings, and sometimes those feelings get hurt, and when you hurt my feelings, I will let you know. I just don't want people to misunderstand what I do. They can make fun of me, that's fine, because I make fun of people too. But never forget that I am a person with feelings. And I know people are laughing at me right now because I'm saying that. But there is a person behind all this stuff, and sometimes this person gets tired of constantly explaining themselves and constantly reminding people to not be an asshole towards me. Because some people are very dickish towards me. And sometimes I have to remind those people, if I was there standing in front of you, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't talk to me that way. So you shouldn't talk to me that way on Twitter. It helps being this big, too, that people will not say things to my face that they would say to me on Twitter. I never discount my privilege for being an extremely large white dude, for making people reluctant to say things to me in person that they would say to me on Twitter.
By the same token, though, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but you did just mention that you're an asshole on Twitter, but not in person. So maybe the things that you are saying in your performance art you wouldn't say in person?
I'm pretty much sure that in person I say probably 99% of what I say on Twitter. I used to play up the character more on Twitter, but I don't know. There's this idea of diminishing returns on an idea. And I probably used to argue with people a lot more on Twitter about stuff. The things I argue with people on Twitter about now are usually not related to coding. They're just related to being a human being and treating people decently. I get into lots of arguments with people about diversity and politics, and just like I want people to understand that you can be the way I am and also be a nice person at the same time. Twitter is performance art. I try to be funny, and I also try to make sure I don't stray from being funny into the line of being personally insulting towards people. That's a line I really work. I probably did that in the past. That's why I'm talking about. People may think I was that way, but these days I try really hard not to be insulting, because it is very easy to be insulting and just off the cuff and just blurt something out on Twitter because you're not actually in front of the person. But these days I strive really hard to not be a dick to people on Twitter. I don't know, just because I think it's better to be a well-rounded human than just to poke fun at people and be a dick. I
have learned that you will apparently unfollow for live tweeting friends. So
yeah,
I think I've learned that the hard way. Okay, so I want to talk about True North, because you are the organizer, one of the organizers of True North.
Yep.
What made you want to start a conference?
Well, the fact was there was no PHP-centric conference in Toronto for years and years and years. And I had been wanting to try to get one going and try to convince someone that already ran conferences to do one in Toronto. And then I mentioned it to a few people, and then a friend of mine, Jeremy Cook, said, maybe we could do something kind of like PHP Works, where, we could go to a couple of different places and do like smaller ones. And I was like, nah, that seems like too much effort. So we took the idea and just ran with it. And I was like, well, I've been to enough conferences. I kind of know what works and what doesn't work, and I kind of have an idea of like how to run a call for papers. And as a speaker, I know how I would like speakers to be treated. So it's just like, Toronto, the Toronto area and Canada in general didn't have a PHP-centric conference. You had Confu over in Montreal, but PHP was just a tiny part of what they did. They did everything. So there was no PHP-centric one. And I was like, I can do this. I can run a conference. It's not that hard. And so far I've been proven right. It's not that hard. Again, people think, I don't know, people think all these things are super difficult to do. They're not. They're only difficult if you don't want to do the work. And I was willing to do the work, so I never found it to be a problem. So it's just like we picked a date, and we figured out locations, and then we started saying, okay, well, what do we need to do to make this happen? We need sponsors? Great. Let's find some people to talk to. All right, we need speakers. All right, I know lots of people that want to talk about PHP, so that'll be no problem. I know how these call for papers things work. I know I can sit down and spend time analyzing people's proposals and say this is a good one, or I'd like this one, or I don't like this one, or I know a person that can talk about a particular topic, so I'll ask them to submit. So again, I don't know, I have never found organizing a conference to be difficult. I knew it needed to be done, and we've done it 3 years in a row, and we're going to do it again this year. And I don't know what to tell you, Kayla. Never had a problem, never found it difficult. We just did it. We did it, and it worked, and people have had a good time, and people want to come back. I get all the time people saying to me, I hope I can make it to True North PHP. I'm like, well, you know when it is. Submit a talk. If you don't get accepted, well, you can probably cut you a good deal on a ticket if you want to come. So, again, didn't find the conference stuff hard. Found it easy. It was just time.
So a lot of the things, I've myself thought of trying to do a conference, but a lot of the things that I've talked to people is there's a lot of focus on I guess the minutia or the details. So in theory, like you explained, conferences seem really easy. Find a place, find speakers, find sponsors, profit, more or less. But did you have a template or a guide or a mentor in that for how much should you charge sponsors? How much should you charge for tickets? Do you do a 2-day or 1-day, multi-track or single track? Did you have anyone kind of guiding you there, or did you just intuitively know?
No, we just winged it. We kind of decided we wanted like 2-day multi-track. We decided like up front what was the type of conference we wanted. That was all. That's how everything started. It's like, what type of conference do we want? It's like, we want 2 days, multiple tracks. And then once we knew that, then everything else just kind of cascaded down from that. It was like, okay, so how many tracks do we want? Like, well, what are some of the places we can get? How many rooms they got? They got 2 rooms, 3 rooms. Great. Now we have a 3-track conference, right? And how many days can we rent the place for? Well, they can give us 2 days. Great, we'll do 2 days. What about food? Well, we want to have food for the attendees. Can this place do it? Oh, they have catering, in-house catering. Perfect. Now we have a 3-track, 2-day conference with food for the attendees and speakers. It's like, do we have a hotel nearby? Great. Now we can pay for a hotel, and we'll get sponsors. No, I want to pay for people to come. I don't want them. I'm not gonna, like, as a prima donna speaker, I expect to be treated well. So I wanted to treat the speakers who came to my conference the way that I would want to be treated. So that meant, like, when we pick your talk, we'll pay for everything. We'll pay for your flight. We'll pay for your hotel. I will personally try to come to the airport and pick you up if I can work it into my schedule. So it's just like, it just literally started off like, here's the conference I want. So with this conference that I want, what do I need to do to make this happen? All that other stuff, it literally took care of itself. We knew what we needed to do, and then just broke it down into tasks. Like, what do we need to get speakers? Well, we need to track everything. We need to have a system to submit talks. Then we get the talks. Then we have to be like, okay, this person submitted 1 talk. Well, we need 2 talks. Well, okay, can we get them to give another one? How many Canadian speakers do we want? How many U.S. based speakers do we want? How many international speakers do we want? How much does our budget allow us? I mean, I don't know any other way to tell people. We just made it work because, like, we just did it. It's like, well, okay, well, this is the parameters. We're just going to go and do it. And we're not going to spend a lot of time, like, being angst-ridden over it and worrying about little minor details and about worrying about, is this one little thing going to ruin the conference? No, man, we're just going to go and do it. And sheer force of personality and understanding. Like, I really think this wouldn't have worked if I hadn't gone to a lot of conferences already and known what worked and what didn't work and what I liked and what I didn't like. So I tried to make sure the conference was everything that I liked and none of the things that I disliked. I mean, there is a reason why that conference is where it is and when it is, and why there's no booze all over the place during the conference itself, and why I treat the speakers the way that I do, and why I come pick them up, and why we put them at the hotel, and why I try to maintain a personal relationship with everyone that comes to my conference. Because those were things that I felt very strongly about and things I was not willing to compromise on.
Okay. So your conference is normally in November.
Correct.
Right? So when did you decide for the first True North? And how long did it take you to plan the conference?
So we probably decided in the spring of that year, the first year that we did it, like March, April, that we wanted to do the conference. The reason for the November slot was there was no competition at the time when we first did it. November was also a very good time to rent space in the Toronto area, right? It's winter time, summer is the worst, spring is the worst. Winter time, nothing going on. People are probably willing to cut you a good deal just so they can get their venue used for something, right? And we were lucky that we had an early contact with Microsoft, with the folks from Microsoft Canada, that they basically said, yeah, we'll give you the space in exchange for being a headline sponsor. And then once that was done, it's like, well, that's one thing we never have to worry about ever again. So, I mean, basically about 6 months before the conference was going to happen, we decided we wanted to do it. Again, I know it seems like we were flying from the seat of our pants, but it's just like, man, we know what to do. Let's do this. Let's get it done. Break everything down that we need to do. Assign it, say, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this other person's going to do these things, and make it happen because we have a hard deadline. Set a constraint of when things need to get done and get it done. And that's it. I know I make it look easy, but I don't know. Just all these things we had to do, they just had to get done. And whether they're easy or not didn't matter. They still had to get done.
Okay, out of curiosity, had you written OpenCFP prior to starting True North?
Nope. I didn't like basically OpenCFP happened because I really disliked how we handled the proposals for the first year. So it's like, I'll write something to manage them for the second year. And like I said, I'll also make this available to other people because I'm sure this is a problem other people want to solve. And I'm extremely happy that other people are using it. I mean, I would never care if anyone other than me used it, but the fact that there are other people who have made really good contributions to the project is good. And I think it's awesome that other conferences are using it. That plus everyone using Joined In for rating talks is a humongous win for the power of open source and community. Now we have PHP conferences using a tool to collect the papers written in PHP and a tool to rate all the talks written in PHP. I mean, that's awesome. That shows, I know Cal Evans goes on and on about it, but that is absolutely 100% the power of community. Absolutely.
So I actually, I get sad when I try to submit to conferences that don't use OpenCFP, just as a side note, because I do really like it. But now we have Joined In and OpenCFP, and then Matt Stauffer's, I forgot what it's called, proposal.
Dave the Papers, I forget what he's called, but yeah.
I think it's Save My Proposal, something of that nature. So Is there a plan in the works to integrate those three things?
Absolutely. I mean, I see no reason not to. It's just in terms of, again, because this is a time management issue, right? I have desires to do things that make money, and then when I'm comfortable with the amount of money that I'm making from these things, then I can start devoting my time on Fridays to working on OpenCFP to create a nice API so that Matt's little tool, when people have talks that they want, they can just with a button say I want to submit it to True North, and it's done. You know, they have an account over there already, and they just click a button, and their talk gets submitted. Because people all the time say, you know, why do I have to? You know, I'm tired of cutting and pasting, and I'm like thinking I'm tired of hearing people complain about cutting and pasting, but it's a time issue. There's so many things I want to do and only so much time to do them. And an API for OpenCFP is definitely something that I want. It's just a question of when it gets done. It's not an if, it's a when. Because we definitely need it. It would be the idea of federated talk submissions is awesome. The idea that you go one place, have all your talks there, and then with a button submit them to a whole bunch of conferences is good. I see no reason to not give people that. It's just a question of what form it takes and how much time I get to work on it and whether I can convince other people to help me with it.
Yeah, I think from an organizer's point of view, when a speaker submits a talk, it would be kind of cool to link that to Joined In so you can see, you know, what I've done in the past, how my talks are rated, what feedback I got, if you're not personally familiar with that speaker.
Yeah, it would be good, but again, I mean, these are all open source projects, and people only have so much time, and I am very loath to tell people what to do with their time because I'm so jealous of mine. So, Joined In integration would be good. Matt knows that I want an API for OpenCFP, so people can submit talks to it. So I may just bang out a really ugly API implementation that works, that accomplishes things the way that I want them to work, and then if people want to go ahead and write a better one, well, I'm extremely happy to accept pull requests and take a look at them, and if I like them, I will accept them, and if I don't like them, I will reject them.
So we had, I'm part of the PHP League, and we had something come across our mailing list recently that talked about the process of having maintainers open up issues for things that they would like to see, I guess. So me as a maintainer opening up issues for things that I would like to see but don't necessarily have time for. Is that something that you would be willing, like, you talk about writing the API and then someone else can improve it. Is it something that you would be willing to accept a pull request if I just wanted to write the API and send it to you? Or is it something that you want to be more integrally involved in?
So at the highest level, I want an API. So that's the overriding concern I have. And if someone else writes one and it looks reasonable to me and it has tests that prove that it works, then chances are I'll just go, I am totally 100% happy to accept someone else's vision of an API because the app needs one. And I am just but one grumpy person with only so much time. And if other people want to write one, that's great. I don't know, maybe I know that some of the people who work on OpenCFP are going to be at Tech, so maybe I can corner some of them, and we can spend some time doing a bit of a hackathon and try to see if we can sprint our way through working API in a couple of hours. I'm pretty sure we could probably do something. But yeah, like, I don't reject other people's contributions. I generally rubber stamp a lot of pull requests that are covering functionality that I've wanted but haven't done myself, and if people want to do it, that's great. I will accept that pull request and merge it in, and boom, we have some functionality that we didn't have before. I don't. When it comes to OpenCFP, because there's way more people other than just me using it, I am perfectly happy to push my ego aside and accept a working solution from somebody, because that's the goal, a working application.
Awesome. Okay, so we have covered True North, speaking, books, grumpiness. We are about half an hour over time right now. Is there anything else that you didn't get to talk about that you want to?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if I want to talk about one last thing for these last couple of minutes, people are way more capable than they think they are, and I'd like to think that I'm proof for a lot of people about what happens when you commit to do something and execute on it, and that really good things can come from a desire to learn how to do things and a commitment to actually execute. People, as generally speaking, are terrible at executing on things, and I don't always do everything that I set out to do, but I get most of it done. And I think people need to stop shortchanging themselves. I mean, we talk about imposter syndrome. I can be very honest when I can say I'm tired of hearing about imposter syndrome, because people are now using imposter syndrome as an excuse about why. Instead of a reason, it's an excuse. It's a lazy justification. For many people, it's a lazy justification for not doing the things they are capable of doing. And I wish people would just actually sit down and admit to themselves that, yes, I know how to do things, and yes, I will commit to doing some of these things, and stop worrying about perfection, and stop worrying about, is the time right, and how do I find time? Man, I tell you, nobody finds time for anything. They make time. You commit to do things. You agree to do things. And I just wish so many more of my friends would look at what I've done and say, if Chris can do this with all the nonsense he does in his life, and he still gets all these things done, why can't I do this? And be honest with yourself about the reasons why you're not doing things, and the reason why you're not achieving goals, and the reason why, like, why have I worked from home for 9 years? Because I wanted to, and I was willing to push very hard to make that happen. And I see so many of my friends, both online and in real life, who are smart, capable people, and just need to push through all that shit and get stuff done, and realize that it's okay to want to do things, and it's okay to push to get the things that you want. But stop hiding. Stop telling yourself that you can't do these things. I'm not so special. I just talk a lot, and I commit to do things. And there are many, many other of my friends who can do the same thing, who do quality work, but just lie to themselves about the reasons why they can't achieve the things that they want to do. I am not so special, Kayla. I just agree to do things, and that's where I see so many of my friends falling down. Execute, get it done, do things. It doesn't have to be something big. Just get it done. I wouldn't have if I hid behind imposter syndrome and perfectionism. I wouldn't have these books and the videos, and I wouldn't be here talking to you if I hadn't just said, I'm going to do this thing because I want to get it done. Not because it has to be perfect, because it has to get done. And I just wish so many more of my friends who I see struggle with perfectionism and imposter syndrome, and all this, it's like, I'm not so special. You can do it too. Get it done. Commit. Put blocks of time in your calendar and say, on Friday for 2 hours, I'm going to go do these things. And I'm only going to do them for those 2 hours. And I'm not going to stress leading up to it, and I'm not going to stress afterwards about how much I got done. Because I said for 2 hours I'm going to do this thing. That's it. I just for so many of my friends I see struggle with this stuff, and I just want to tell them, you can do this. You can 100% do this. I'm not so special. 100%. Get it done. You can do this. You can commit an hour a day to do something you really want to do, and not hide, and not use excuses, and not procrastinate. Just get it done. You can do it. I do so many things with my life, and I keep thinking, I'm not special. I just agreed to do it, and I committed and didn't lie and say I'm going to do it, and I'm only going to worry about what I'm doing. Like I'm playing Magic later on tonight, and I'm not thinking about any of that stuff until 5 o'clock, because I know at 5 o'clock the brain's going to flip into table flipping mode over not performing well at Magic. But until then, I'm really not going to worry about it. And I just wish people, I wish people could learn to do that too, because it's made me a much happier person and not struggling with all sorts of issues related to my performance as a programmer. I just don't care. I'm going to go and do it, and the result is the result. And so far, people have really, really liked what I'm doing. And I'm not going to lie when I say that provides me with a lot of satisfaction. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie about saying it appeals to my ego too. It's awesome. It's awesome knowing that what you do is wanted by people. And so many people have no idea how much other people want what they can do.
So is your third book going to be Grumpy's Guide to Time Management? Because I would totally buy that.
No, it is not, but it's going to be about, it's actually about using Hack and HHVM. So sorry to disappoint people. But I have offered to do talks on time management, and no one's wanted them yet. So at some point, I guess I should do a video series about time management. I'm sure that will sell really well.
I mean, you do run a conference. So.
I do. But I try not to speak at my own conferences except for like the closing talk, where I talk about how awesome the conference was and how awesome it's going to be the next year. I didn't start a conference just so I could talk, like my wife jokes. I just started a conference because we needed one in Toronto, and there wasn't one. And now there is, and that makes me really happy too.
Do you, are we still going to get Mastodons? Is that happening this year?
That's what I'm going to try to do. I'm just trying to time it all so that things arrive just in time, because I don't want stuff sitting around my house for months and months and months in boxes before the conference. So as part of my time management, I like to plan things backwards. So in another couple of weeks, all that stuff has to get cranked up. A Kickstarter so that I don't have to pay for everything myself. Because a minimum order of 1,000 elephants is pretty daunting. That I have to find a way to give away 1,000 elephants somehow. So we only need a couple hundred for the conference, so that still means 800 of them or 700 of them we have to find a way to give away to people. See, those are the things I worry about, not about doing some goddamn conference, because that's easy. Trying to figure out how to make sure I don't have a box of 1,000 elephants at my house is the thing I worry about.
Conferences are easy. Herds of elephants are not. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, well, we are about out of time, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me. And I think I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has learned a lot. So thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody. And like I said, I answer pretty much every tweet sent to me. So Grumpy Programmer without the U on Twitter. I read all of them. I don't respond to everything, but if anybody has any questions about anything I've talked about, I am happy to discuss them with people.
Awesome. So we will see you on the Twitter.
Bye, everybody.